As it turns out, there were two Brighton games on Saturday, a 60-minute behind closed doors game earlier in the day that we lost 1-0. The other game, one of those rare occasions where fans were actually allowed in to watch a friendly, which finished 2-2. Lots of talking points, mainly the players who didn't feature. So I feel like that's a good place to start. George, I'm going to ask you about Matteas Fernandez, because that's the name that's been on everybody's lips. It's not been very well, apparently. How long do you reckon we're going to hold on to him? Do you think this one's going to rumble on until September?
I've never really been confident they could keep hold of him, because he was the only player last season who looked any good in the Premier League. And I think to almost forcibly keep him in the Championship, not that it'd be unfair to him, he signed a contract, and if the club want to keep him, the club will keep him. But I think he's too good for the Championship. Will still did tell us that he would never leave anyone out of the squad because of transfer rumours. And that was after Aaron Ramsdale didn't play in the first game, and he's obviously now gone. So I am inclined to somewhat believe the fact he was ill. I know in a couple of pictures in training as well, but you never know when those were actually taken. Obviously, the club have set a price tag for him. I hope it was about 50 million at least. We were talking about it just then, but about Romeo Lavia, the price he went for. If he's going for around 58 million, then Matteas Fernandez is worth at least 50 million. So if they accept anything under that, I think people can be frustrated. I think people can be frustrated even if they do sell him. But if you've got someone offering you 50 million pounds, and if it's a club like an Atletico Madrid, I don't think Matteas Fernandez would be too pleased if he has to stay in the Championship when he could go to someone like that. So I would prefer it to be done sooner rather than later, because the main thing is they need to get players out the door. I'm sure we'll come on to that in a bit. But if they can get players out the door, they can get the Matteas Fernandez replacement in nice and early, because you don't want that to be the last week of the transfer window and you've played a couple of games. We don't really want another James Ward-Prowse situation, right, where he plays a game but everyone knows he's not going to be there, and then you've got to go and reshuffle your squad. So I prefer him to stay, but if he's going to go, I'd rather it gets done sooner rather than later.
Do you think it will be abroad as well? Is that like the most likely option?
Well, that's what people keep saying, don't they? They keep saying he favours a move abroad. I think if I was him, I would favour a move abroad, because we're talking about it as well, just off the pod, that I don't know if he's necessarily a top 6 Premier League team, but he could be a sort of a top 4 European side player. Someone like, again, Atletico Madrid or Juventus, they have the money to probably pay for him. They'll be in continental competitions as well, and he'll be able to get minutes there. So, and obviously he's not actually English, so the opportunity to go abroad is probably more enticing, especially someone like Spain, not too far obviously from Portugal. So yeah, I think he'd probably go abroad, but there's, by all accounts, a couple of Premier League teams after him as well, and Premier League teams, as we know, have plenty of money. They're just quite reluctant to give it to Saints because they think they can almost bully them a little bit because they've been relegated.
I've kind of started with Fernandez, and then we'll just go through the players based on how good we think they are. Steve, Tyler Dibbling obviously played earlier in the day after recovering from an injury. Do you think he's got a huge desire to play for Everton? Is that the club he dreamed of joining as a kid?
You wouldn't have thought so, but at the end of the day, they are a fairly big club. They're obviously moving to a brand new stadium with all the kind of trappings that comes with that. Liverpool's a big city, and it is a big footballing city. There's kind of no doubt about that. But I mean, at the end of the day, they're a Premier League side, and if he kind of got into the kind of David Moyes style of play, then I would expect him to be getting plenty of minutes there. So I guess it's one of those sort of clubs that would interest him sort of purely on am I going to be playing Premier League football, or am I going to be sitting on the bench and maybe playing the occasional under-21 game or Carabao Cup game and things like that. So I think, there's possibly something there with Everton in terms of would it be attractive, but I don't know. Are Everton really going to drop the sort of money that we would ask? I'm not sure they've got the budget to be able to do it. They've probably got priorities elsewhere.
What's a good price? What do you think?
40 minimum. The problem is that obviously Saints stuck that 100 million price on him in January, February time, and everyone laughed at them. But everybody knew why we did it. That's your kind of starting point for negotiation. If you want to do the deal without any questions asked, there's your money, get it done. But the problem that everybody's now going to have, and I think we will have this, is of course he looked amazing when he first burst onto the scene last season because nobody had seen him. Nobody had any tape on him, and he was kind of causing fullbacks all kinds of issues, regardless of whether they were good or otherwise. I mean, Diego Dallo, I mean, some people rate him, some don't, but I mean, he made him look like a park player in that game against Man United. But the more games you play at that level, the more teams have tape on you, and they're able to come up with sort of analysis on where your strengths and weaknesses are. And I think Dibbling probably also suited the Russell Martin system far more than he did either of the subsequent managers. So I think one of the issues is that obviously he's been such low confidence since probably December, coming into a team that's playing a system that really doesn't suit him at all. And we clearly, I mean, we mentioned this loads of times, didn't we, back end of last season? We clearly rushed him back from injury after he got that knock at Old Trafford. And the club said, 4 to 6 weeks. And then 2.5 weeks, he's back in the team. And the kid's not had the opportunity to get himself fit. And I think that possibly causes us problems because we can't then show, well, he's clearly a proven Premier League player. He scored twice, I think. Ipswich home, Palace away, I think that's right. And then the couple of cup games against Swansea. And yeah, I think sides that are going to be dropping the sort of money we're looking for are probably going to want slightly better numbers than that, I would imagine.
The other one that's been making the headlines today, Glenn, of course, is Joe Aribo, who it turns out has been given some space to decide his future, which is a new one on me. And apparently a few clubs have shown interest in him. Now, on the face of it, you'd be like, fine, let him go. But he did make 32 appearances in the Premier League last season. So, you know,
I don't care. Honestly, I don't care. He's one of those that I don't care. There's a lot of them that I don't care if they stay or go, to be honest. And he's firmly in that bracket. He'd be half decent in the Championship. And, you know, depending on what situation we find ourselves in with Dibbling and Fernandez, and to a lesser extent the deeper lying midfielders, he could do a decent job. He was decent in the Championship last time, but he's certainly not a player you're desperate to break the bank to keep. Would we want to sign him if he played for someone else? Probably not. No. So as far as I'm concerned, he's got a year left on his contract. He's certainly someone we can do without. And if he goes and we can get 4 or 5 million quid back or whatever, then I think it's worth doing. It's I know we'll probably get onto him in a minute, but it's a bit similar to Bednarek in that they'd be decent this season if we held on to them. But you'd like to think that, you know, they're not so good that we can't do without them. But I mean, there is the question, as I just said, about midfield cover. But I don't actually think that if everyone was fit and available, I don't think he'd be in the side anyway. So if they can get a few quid for him, then with 1 year left on his contract, it's an economic decision as much as anything. But as I say, he's not sufficiently good enough to worry about losing, in my book anyway.
And some of the younger players look like they're capable of stepping up as well, which is pretty decent. George, just to wrap up, obviously, news on Flynn Downs, Taylor Harwood-Bellis. We're not expecting them to leave, are we? They haven't got mysterious illnesses. They genuinely have been out and just are expected back soon. Yeah,
obviously Flynn, I think it was against Valenciennes or it might be Gillingham. I can't remember exactly which one of the closed doors friendlies he went off, and he's not trained since then. I don't think he's not been back in training at all since. And he obviously didn't go to Girona either. Harwood-Bellis back in training last week, but he got that ankle injury, didn't he, against Everton. End of last season meant that he missed the under-21s Euros. And I wonder how much that injury and the fact he's probably not going to be ready right up until the transfer deadline pretty much has maybe put clubs off, in combination with the fact he's probably not quite a £20 million defender that a Premier League club are going to want to sign him. So, yeah, it seems to me like he's either someone who leaves very late on because clubs realise, oh my God, we need a centre-back, and he's solid. He's proven that he's definitely good enough to be at the top of the Championship, not quite the Premier League yet. So yeah, I have a funny feeling he might be the one out of all the players that we sort of circled at the end of last season that if they're going to keep one of them, he might by default, because of his injury, end up being the one who stays.
I think we'd all take that. Just to get onto the game yesterday, Glenn, the first half was quite familiar, wasn't it? Like a woeful Saints team chasing some Premier League stars around the pitch. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of hope there. And going a goal behind, it was, it was a throwback to last season in parts.
It's funny. Pre-season used to be, you'd get to the end of pre-season and the last game before the first game of the actual season, you'd see the starting 11 and you'd see hopefully the way you were going to play and take it into the season. I don't think it's like that anymore because pre-seasons are now so short because of, seasons finishing late, and then you have England under 21 tournaments, like Ronnie Edwards, for example. He only joined up 3-4 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't really get the opportunity to play your team. And I'm beginning to think now that pre-seasons these days are almost just about fitness, and all the there'll be stuff done on the training ground. But and picking Brighton as an opposition, you're not going to see anything like Brighton in the Championship. It's crazy. You're not going to play teams that keep the ball as well as they do. You're not going to play teams as good as they are. I mean, where did they finish last year? 7th, was it?
8th, I think.
Yeah, I think they just missed it on Europe, didn't they?
So I mean, there are issues with that. I mean, so for example, Damien Downs, he's never going to play against. He's not going to play this season against players like Van Hecker and Lewis Dunk. He's just not. So he struggled, and not surprisingly, he's just in the door, and and he struggled. But I will say I was impressed with the young lad in midfield, Moses Sissé. I thought he was excellent. He played with no fear, and it was like, I know I'm up against better players, but I don't care. I'm going to show them what I'm about. And I thought he was excellent. And we're talking about Aribo leaving. He's one of the reasons why. I mean, you don't really want to consider any of the really young players as reliable first team starters. You should have more experienced players in front of them. But he certainly looked ready to step in if someone's if Flynn Downs or Shea Charles is not available or whatever. He looked decent. So, but yeah, the first half, when I saw the 11 on the team sheet, I was just, oh my word. You look at it and you see the forward line is Damien Downs, and then you see Cameron Archer, Ryan Fraser, Adam Armstrong, and just think that's so uninspiring. There's just and because it was Brighton, we spent the first half basically chasing shadows, and it was about concentrating in defence and trying not to let anything in. And we were the one down at half time. That was despite the best efforts of both our fullbacks, who I thought were terrible. So we started off with Bree and Manning, and it was like they had some sort of restraining order that prevented them going within 20 yards of their respective wingers. And they just set so much time. I mean, Minte, who scored the goal, it's just, Manning was nowhere. James Bree was nowhere frequently. Joshua Kwasi will get the blame probably for both the goals because he wasn't.
Looks a little bit raw, didn't he? A little bit raw.
He did, and it was the opposite to Sissé, I thought, in that Kwasi seemed to shrink a little bit, because he was playing against better players and he seemed to struggle a little bit. You see, Brighton won every header in the box, for example. So, yeah, it's a steep learning curve for him. But again, he's playing against better players than he's ever going to play against in the Championship. So there's, but yeah, he needs to learn from that, and I'm sure he will. But yeah, the first half was pretty woeful. The only good thing about it really is that we only went in one down, and I think you can say the same quite safely about the first 15 minutes of the second half. And, so if that's the first 11 that we're going to put out, God help us, basically.
Yeah, we'll get on to Saturday in just a moment. George, things did change though second half with the substitutions that came on, and a change of formation at the back as well, which seems to sort of change the energy and lift things a little bit. And I know the manager was a bit happier with that sort of last half hour or so.
Yeah, Will Still, when he came in, made it quite clear he wants to play a back four. I actually don't mind the idea of a back three if they can play it and impose themselves the way they did in the last 30 minutes. Because you've got someone like Ronnie Edwards, who I thought was really good on the right side of the back three, kind of almost shifting across, being a bit like a right back, as we saw him out in Spain. And that allowed Sugawara to just get forward. And we all know that that's the part of the game that he's good at. If he's asked to defend, that's where the problems start happening. If he can just get forward, try and get some balls into the box. And it was his cross that obviously then led to the corner, which led to the penalty. So it's a bit of a stretch to call it like a pre-assist, but he did contribute. And I think that then allowed someone like Adam Armstrong, who was out on the right wing, or they were shifting about quite a lot up front, but it just sort of allowed them to be a bit more narrow, gave Jay Robinson the freedom. I quite like that shape. Obviously, Brighton I think they're behind Saints in their pre-season. Obviously, the Premier League started a bit later, so and they made changes as well, and that probably did weaken them. But at the same time, Saints brought players on, like Jay Robinson, for example, had played the 60-minute game. He's had a bit of a tight hamstring in the week, so Will Still asked him, "What can you play?" He went, "Yeah, I can play," and he played very well, didn't he, when he came on? So I think it maybe might have been a case where players who they perhaps weren't thinking, let's get an extra 30 minutes into their legs, they thought, well, let's change things up because the players on the pitch aren't doing anything. And I think all four of those subs that came on, except for like the two young lads at the end in midfield, Akachukwu and Cam Bragg, not to count them because they got 10 minutes and 3 minutes, but the four main subs that came on have probably all put their hand up to start against Wrexham, I think.
Yeah, well, we'll talk more about that in just a moment when we get onto the Wrexham game. Steve, the only other thing I want to touch on with Ramsdale gone, looks like Gavin Bazunu is going to be the number one. That seems pretty clear. Are we happy with that? There's been a lot of noise about that this week.
I mean, based on Bazunu's performances in pre-season, yeah, absolutely no problem. Frankly, he was excellent against Castellon in that first friendly over in Spain. 3 or 4 excellent saves in that first half. Saves that, frankly, we didn't really see from him first time around. So yeah, I mean that bodes well, I think. And yeah, he did what he had to do yesterday. He wasn't at fault for either goal. I don't think he could have done anything for either of them. They were well directed into the corner, generally through legs, so he had minimal time to react. And yeah, I mean, as you've said, we're not going to be up against that sort of quality every week. So yeah, I'm reasonably satisfied with Bazunu in there. I think ultimately it depends on what we're doing in terms of how we want to be kind of running our possession game. Because obviously we saw the issue in that behind closed doors Valenciennes game where Jack Stevens rekindled PTSD of old and presented them with a goal. And yeah, if we're going to be doing that, I mean, obviously we know that Bazunu is quite comfortable with the ball at his feet, but I think we would probably prefer him to be a little bit more direct. But it certainly looked as if his distribution in these few games that we've been able to watch has been fine. So basically, as long as he can do that and stop the ball going in that big net thing, then yeah, absolutely no problem with that selection, really.
It is a weird one, isn't it, Glenn? Because I think you wrote about it today about with Ramsdale going but not actually going. There is still that like 0.001% chance that he might come back if we do get promoted and things haven't worked out for him. But it would be silly to go out and buy somebody else when you've got Bazunu, McCarthy, and a decent young lad too.
It makes it more difficult to sign a first choice goalkeeper because if you're the goalkeeper being approached, you'd be thinking, if we get promoted, there is a chance still that Ramsdale comes back. I think it's a very, very small chance because I've got great belief that Aaron Ramsdale will end up as the first choice goalkeeper for Newcastle and he will do really well. But if on the other side of the coin he doesn't, or he doesn't get a chance, or he doesn't play, the only way Newcastle are not going to sign him, in my book, is if he doesn't displace Nick Pope from the team and Nick Pope stays fit all season, which is unlikely. That's the only way he'll end up back with us. And of course, we've got to get promoted. Otherwise, we'll be in the same boat next year. So, yeah, I do think the more I think about it, the more I think it makes it more difficult to sign a first choice who's significantly better than Bazunu and McCarthy. But I think whilst in an ideal world, personally, I certainly want a better goalkeeper than Gavin Bazunu was 2 years ago.
Yeah,
because there were too many. I mean, the old stat about shots to goals, the expected goals, and all that stuff, where he was terrible. Is his shot stopping? If his shot stopping's improved, and he's shown positive signs in these preseason games that he's not going to be beaten as easily, then all well and good. But if he slips back to the sort of level he was 2 years ago, it wasn't all bad, but there were too many soft goals that kind of, when he dived for the ball in the corner and didn't actually go anywhere, that sort of thing. I remember the game at Watford was just grim for that. The big dive and the ball went under him. Terrible. So, if he can up his game from that level, then we won't have a problem. But let's hope he does. I mean, and McCarthy's a reliable enough understudy. He's used to being an understudy. He has been. Part of my problem with him is he seems to have been happy to be an understudy for something like 6 out of the 8 years that we've had him. So yeah, it's not too bad. The issue comes if one of them gets injured, of course, and then we've only got one relatively experienced goalkeeper. So then we might be scrambling around emergency loan situations.
Loan, yeah.
We're going to have to bring someone in, but I don't think it will be
first choice.
It will be a first choice. No.